Whoop, wrong one. Oh well. Hi, yes, hello everyone. Good morning. Bear with me for a hot second. I switched up my audio a little bit, as you can probably see, and that means uh, I wasn't able to switch from this mic to this mic before starting to stream. I'm not gonna fully explain the technical reasons as to why. So give me a hot second while we switch this, because this is a much better mic uh, that I'm trying out. And also let me know how the audio is. For instance, I think the music is perhaps a little too loud. So let's. That's a little better for me at least. Let me know how it is for you. And now let me just switch my mic over so we can get you guys some better audio. Do. Let's just switch devices. There we go, and that should pick me up a little bit better. Let me know how it sounds. Yeah, it looks on my end maybe a little bit loud. So why don't we just turn that down just a touch? Okay. Cool. Uh, yeah, let me know how that sounds. Hopefully I'm not blowing out your eardrums, but we should be able to move the boom mic out of the way. Fantastic. And get to it. Hello, everyone. How is it going? This is a fabulous Monday morning on my end. Hope your day is starting out well, ending well, wherever you're at in the world and whatever time it is. Uh, I don't want to get into it just quite yet. I first want to talk about a little bit of what I want to do today. So, last week, if you were here, you may remember that we started building beaches in Blender. And it went decently. I didn't get quite as far as I was hoping we would. Uh, Today I want to get a little bit farther, but also talk about the Gabor texture. I have not heard this word said out loud, so I don't know if it's Gabor, like I, I've got no idea, but it's a very cool texture. We discovered it at the towards the end of the stream last week, and I started playing around with it, and I was having a little bit of a hard time, but it showed a lot of really great potential, so I want to talk about it today. You sound better now. Thank you so much. Hello everyone. Uh, Glad the audio is better. This is not a permanent change. At least not yet. I'm kind of borrowing this headset, testing it out and whatnot. I am planning to buy this headset. And that's kind of my current thoughts. Like I said, testing it out and whatnot. So I'm glad the audio is better. And I mean, the sound quality on my end is also much better. And it's wireless. It's wireless with so little latency. It's so nice. I feel so free. uh, but yeah, like I was saying, we're gonna test out the Gabor texture. I think it'll help a lot for making landscapes in general, not just this project, but making a lot of various landscapes, and I'll explain why when we get into it. But yeah, good morning, and I guess you know what? Yeah, let's just get into it. I kind of want to take a look before we jump into Blender, just at the Gabor Texture Node, like in the manual here. So let's zoom in so you guys can actually read the text here. Uh, do. Gabor noise is visually characterized by random interleaved. I've not seen that word before. But random bands, essentially, whose direction and width can be controlled. Okay. And that's kind of what we've seen. Additionally, it can be used to create omnidirectional noise, like the standard noise texture node, but since it is more expensive to compute, that makes sense. Given all it does and how it looks, it would be a lot more expensive to compute. But using the noise texture node is probably the better option in most cases, but we're going to break that rule. See the examples for more information. Cool, cool, cool. I like the Suzanne monkey head behind you. Thank you. My wife printed that for me. It was going to be in a video, but then things got weird with the video. But thank you. I have that Suzanne. I have also got a little bitty Suzanne that sits over and stares me down, I guess. But okay, so inputs, we've got a vector. Will be evaluated. The Z component is ignored in the 2D case. And yeah, there's two options here. We have 2D and 3D. Hello. Hello, Kid George. How's it going? But yeah, we've got 2D and 3D case, so we'll take a look at kind of the differences there. Because it's interesting. I'm not sure how it calculates everything different, but it changes the inputs, which is interesting to say the least. We've got, scale, frequency, the rate at which the Gabor noise changes across the space. This is different from the scale input in that it only scales perpendicular to the Gabor noise direction. Okay, that's good to keep in mind. When I inevitably forget this, remind me, the scale input only scales perpendicular to Gabor noise, and we'll see the Gabor noise like it like it said in the description, it does periodic omnidirectional noise. So you'll see a bunch of like choppy waves, which is why we're going to be using this. I think this is a great stream idea. I have not played around enough with the Gabor node yet. Right? Same. I literally learned about it last Monday. I played around with it once or twice over the course of last week, and I have a better idea as to how it works now. I've yet to fully read the manual, which is why we're starting off with that. And I'm I'm just excited to work with it because I've been trying to do similar things to what this node does, but with just trig nodes, like doing a bunch of like interlacing different waves and things like that, and it was real hard to get what I wanted, and this kind of just does it. So it's really fun. Anyway, so we've got the frequency, the rate at which the Gabor noise changes across space. Did I just read that? I did just read that. Anisotropy. Anisotropy? English is weird. The directionality of Gabor noise. 1 means the noise is completely directional, while 0 means the noise is omnidirectional. Okay. That's one of those things I read anisotropy in the list of inputs, and I always think I know what it means, and then I read it, I'm like, no, I've been thinking about this wrong. No wonder I've been having a hard time controlling this node. So that's good to know. So, okay, 1, completely directional. We're going to have parallel waves going all the way across our geometry. 0, it's going to be kind of a mess. I say a mess because I don't really know how to describe it. I have played with this input. It starts to look more like Perlin noise when it's set closer to 0. Then we have orientation, so the direction of anisotropic Gabor noise. This is an angle for the 2D case, and I like using it as an angle, by the way. That's a lot more intuitive, but the 3D case can be more fun in some ways. But while it is a unit direction vector in the 3D case, and like I said, we'll take a look at that because it's got a weird UI. It's got a unique UI, I should say. I don't know of any other node that has inputs quite like this one, specifically for orientation. So, okay, we've got properties, like I mentioned, 2D, 3D. In 2D, it's just the Z component is ignored. Oh, wait, we've got a note. Higher dimensions corresponds to higher render time, so lower dimensions should be used unless higher dimensions are necessary. Okay. Does it have... Oh, it's just talking about 2D or 3D. Yeah, go with 2D if you can, is basically what this is saying, because you want that efficiency and you don't want redundant dimensions. I love what I do some days. I get to say some really fun sentences. Redundant dimensions is just a fun turn of phrase. Anyway, and then we've got the output. So we've got the value, the Gabor noise value from random intensity and phase. This is equal to sine the phase multiplied. Hold on. This is equal to sine of the phase multiplied by the intensity. So yeah, value is probably what I've used the most in my testing. It gives you a nice sine wave. Like it's got some randomness in it, both in orientation and a little bit of spread of the frequency, but it gives you a nice sine wave. We'll see this again in a second. And then the phase, so the phase of the Gabor noise, this gives you a really nice choppy noise. Like it gives you kind of a sawtooth noise. And that's something that I've wanted for a while and didn't know we had. So that's really nice to play around with. Then we've got intensity. Yeah, it's the intensity of the Gabor noise, which has no random phase. That's interesting. Oh, wait. Hold on. Yeah, this has no random intensity. This has no random phase. But value has random intensity and phase. Okay. So value is actually going to give us more randomness than either of the phase or intensity outputs. That's good to note. This is why I say read the manual, right? And why I've been trying really hard to read the manual. There's so much in the manual, but it's these little details that you wouldn't be able to intuit just by looking at this node in Blender, right? I would have sworn that this gave us random intensity or random phase, but it doesn't. So I'm curious, are there cases where we'd want to combine phase and intensity in ways that we don't get with just value? Maybe. I guess value gives us cosine of the combination of phase and intensity. Or sorry, it gives us sine. But if we wanted cosine, we'd have to combine these ourselves. And maybe we'll play with that here in a hot second. Anyway, so here are some examples. I'm not going to read. Well, no, let's maybe read through this. Okay. Because, yeah, I was going to say we can just skip over this, but I think this is explaining some of. Oh, yeah, here are the parameters that we get for these different. This is such a good reference. Oh, that's such a good reference. Okay. The following demonstrates different outputs of the node with different parameters. As can be seen, the noise is visually characterized by interleaved bands that are generally oriented in a specific direction, but the anisotropy parameter can be decreased below 1. Really? It's not clamped? To make bands more random in directions. Definitely gonna have to play with that. Oh man, I was hoping to just get into some of my thoughts on how to make the landscape we were making last time, but no, we really are going to have to test out all of this stuff. Like, I plan to test out some of it. Now I'm just like, oh, there's so many different combinations we can do. Combinations and adjusting the vector space. So that's going to be something pretty important for this. We have this vector input. And I don't know why. This must be an old image. In Blender, all of these inputs are fields. So there's circles here, which means we have one input, right? One value for every point in our geometry. In reality, it's a field, which means the value can be anything for any of them. It's giving sand bed. Exactly. And that's why I wanted to work with this, because last week we were trying to make a beach, and I wanted to make some sand that was going to be under the water. And we were struggling with it a little bit. I was hand painting a lot of it. And that went decently well, but then when trying to combine that noise with other things, it got hard because I hadn't done it quite right in the way that I thought I would want to, and it got weird. it was fine, but like not quite what I wanted. And then we discovered this, and I'm like, okay, now we have parameters to adjust, and I'm so excited for it. But okay, so we talked about how these are fields, not single inputs. The frequency parameter determines the number of bands perpendicular to the direction of the noise. However, the scale parameter can also be used to globally increase the number of bands. So, no wonder these two felt redundant when I was playing around with it. So, the number of bands, I'm going to say like that means there's some variation, like we have some randomness with the frequency, but then the scale is global. So consider increasing the scale first, since high frequency noise can suffer from low contrast and limited interleaving of bands. Okay. Also, I think when they say interleaving, they're talking about this, right? Where it's not just straight lines. It does break the pattern. It all gets broken up. So, okay, that's actually really good to keep in mind. Play with the scale, then the frequency. Nice, nice. So, okay, so value, output, frequency of 2, anisotropy of 1. That makes sense. We get a lot of smooth ripples, waves, and whatnot. And anisotropy of 1. So these are all going in the same direction. They're all kind of in lockstep, all parallel to each other. Again, these are parallel to each other, but it's the value output. Okay, that's the important difference here. I think I skipped over that because value is used so often in more generic ways. So that's value. So that is the sign of what we're seeing. Then we've got phase output. So this is not the not the value. There's no trig going on here. It's just increasing and decreasing phase? Or is this like, it looks like an absolute value of a sine wave to me. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that's kind of what we've got. Or no, is that linear? We're gonna have to play with it and see exactly what we get with phase. Oh wait, no, phase is what I was saying was the sawtooth. So yeah, this looks rounded. I think it's because the human eye expects a light source. So where it's white, you expect that to be like where the light is hitting a surface, but so it looks rounded to me. But that's not what this data is showing. It's showing a linear progression from black to white. So all of these ripples are just, if we used this image to offset in the z axis, it would go from 0 up to 1 in a straight line. Again, I'll show you in a second when we switch over to Blender. You know what? No. We're going to switch over to Blender and take these values and see how this translates to 3D instead of just giving us a grayscale output. Because I always find it easier to understand what's going on when I see those values changing in 3D. So, okay, what I've got here is just a basic grid. We've got a couple of inputs for how much geometry, how much subdivision we have. This is a pretty dense mesh. And hopefully that'll run just fine. It should run fine. This is well within the parameters that I've tested around with and whatnot. Just be mindful when you're testing this yourself of what your computer can do and what else you have going on in the background, all of that jazz. So, okay, let's take our grid and drop it in set position and a combine node so that we can get this noise texture off, driving the Z offset of all of our vertices. So I already did set position. Combine. It helps if I can spell. So, okay, let's start off with the value. And again, we need to switch back to this. I'm also going to drop in, what is it? Set shade smooth. It's just a lot more pleasant to look at, in my opinion. Although it is going to have these weird artifacts because it defaults to a 45 degree. So it's kind of maximizing how much we're stretching individual vertices relative to each other. Anyway, so this does output in the 0 to... Ooh, is that 0 to 1? Yes, it is. It outputs in the 0 to 1 range. I'm pretty sure we just read that too, so if I could remember things, it would help. Anyway, we're in the 0 to 1, which is great because that lets us know how we need to modify this to get it within the bounds that we want, right? Like, this is super stretched out, and I think it would make way more sense to look at a scaled down version of this. So let's drop in a math node, do a multiply, and now we've got half that height, which is real nice. I've found working with about this scale, no, that's still a little extreme. To my eye, I want this just smaller. Like, we don't need all of that extreme geometry because I want to be able to see all of those peaks and valleys without having to fly around in 3D view to really see the diversity of these waves, right? And I guess one thing we could do is also... Now, this is good enough for testing. I was going to start like playing around with it to make it nice to look at and all of that. No. Let's test some of these values first. Okay, so like I said, all of these are fields. We have these diamond sockets. I don't know why in the manual the image is single values. That's got to be a deprecated image. Maybe from when nodes were only used for image processing, perhaps. I'm speculating. But okay, we've got this. And let's see, we have frequency of 2, anisotropy of 1. I'm going to stumble over that word every time, I swear. So this should look like the first image. Yeah. Theirs is a lot more toned down, but it's also just a grayscale image. So if we... what do I want to do here? If we just look at the grid without all of these modifications and take a look at the value, this is the grayscale image that we see in the manual. But of course, then we had to modify all of this to get something that looked like how this should look in my mind's eye. Because these are all values going from 0 to 1. And it becomes much more apparent how this would modify the geometry when we actually use it to offset. And we can see how all of these ridges appear, and that it is a periodic kind of noise. We've got these nice sine waves. Also, I mentioned earlier, like, we'd have to modify it to get cosine. That's not true. That's not true at all. We don't have to use a combination of phase and intensity. We can just offset this value by like 0.5 or something. I don't know. Sine and cosine in my mind are basically the same thing. It's just got a little bit of offset to be cosine. So yeah, that doesn't matter. I don't know why I was saying that. Anyway, this is a nice periodic noise. We've got these nice sine waves. So let's take a look at phase, I think is what's the next image. And yeah, we can see, okay, this is a nice linear drop off. Let's maybe turn down the scale so we have fewer waves to look at, and it's a lot easier to see exactly what's going on here. So we've got, yeah, that periodic, like, linear drop off. Now I'm just saying words. Let's rotate this maybe to be 0. Yeah, so it's easier to see. Well, that doesn't really show us anything just looking in the y-axis, but it's easier to see, okay, we've got some noise along this axis, but all of this is just going 0 to 1, drops off to 0, raises back up to 1, which is what this image is showing us. It just looks rounded because we interpret it. Human mind interprets it to be rounded. I don't know. And if you don't see that as rounded, let me know, because that would be interesting. Anyway, so that's the phase. Hold on. Were we looking at phase or intensity? I thought I said intensity. No, okay. we're looking at phase. Okay, cool. Cool, I did what I was thinking I was doing. Anyway, then we have the intensity output, frequency of 2 and isotropy of 1. So just switching over to the third option for outputs here. Let's take a look. And that's, yeah, that's pretty smooth. Let's turn the scale back up so we see more of it. That's smooth. And yeah, it's, I need to look at the manual again because I'm like, why is it so bulbous? What was it that made that bulbous? It's the intensity of the Gabor noise, no random phase. Why does that make, like, that's anisotropy of 1. If we have anisotropy of 0, it gets a little bit more stretched out and linear. That feels counter to anisotropy of... Oh, they don't even have a 0 case. That's anisotropy of 0.7, so that's still mostly anisotropic. Interesting. Yeah, this mostly just looks like Perlin noise to me. Like, not exactly, but very similar. I know what you mean by sine wave. Yeah, I over-explained that. Oops. Anyway, yeah, this is just kind of bulbous. I like these two outputs more. This feels much more characteristic of this specific noise texture, whereas the other looks like something we could achieve with just Perlin. Probably not. Maybe that's just my unpracticed eye. So yeah, let's play around with some of the other values just real quick. Get a feel for how this changes as we change frequency. I don't think they... I was just looking at it. No, they changed frequency and anisotropy. Okay. So we change this up to 3. We should just get more... Or does that offset the... Oh, are we offsetting the frequency? Okay. And then, yeah, we do the scale. We get more and more of that same image texture. The frequency, is that an offset? I don't think that's what we read. Like it said in this note. Nope, not that one. I thought it was in a note. Vector, Didn't it say somewhere that, like, if you should increase the scale before frequency? This is, okay, here it is. This is different from the scale input in that it only scales perpendicular to the Gabor noise direction. Oh, it might just not be something that we see in intensity. Like, that might just not change intensity. It might just offset it. But if we went to phase, yeah, we would get more of these. No. Oh, I get it now. Okay. This is why I've got to read it and play around with it. So it's saying that the frequency is perpendicular to the Gabor noise. So we've got orientation of 0. Let's turn down the scale a little bit. Get this down to 1 so it's a little easier to see what's going on. So this is noise perpendicular to our Gabor texture. So the Gabor texture is going left to right in this case. And so our frequency adds noise perpendicular to that, so it's going to go up and down on the Y. The Gabor is on the X, frequency noise is on the Y. I made it sound like there are two different kinds of noise here. I don't know that for a fact. That's just kind of how I'm understanding this. Okay, that helps me to understand a little bit of what's going on here. Okay. So anyway, let's turn this down, right? We don't need quite so much of that. Well, it is interesting that frequency also increases the amount of Gabor noise. Like, I mean, yeah, it's frequency. So a little bit of my trouble here is I'm trying really hard to understand, but also explain at the same time. Uh, so yeah, I might get some details wrong. Apologies. Anyway, we've got some sense for how this works. So scale is global. We just kind of zoom in and out of this texture. Frequency increases the amount of perpendicular noise. So we've got all of these jagged lines across here. It does increase the number of jagged lines, but in a different way than scale does. Okay. And it adds noise. So like where this... What was the term they used? It was a good term. De-leveling? Do. Where's that? They had a really good word that it described what that means, or what these breaks in this line means. Interleaving. That's what it was. Interleaving. Okay. Yeah. So frequency controls more of the interleaving of the bands. Scale does more of the global scale of the texture. Frequency also introduces more waves, but in a different way than scale. That's kind of my quick synopsis of those inputs. Okay. And so, yeah, as we turn down anisotropy, we get more of that interleaving. I'm pretty sure that's what it said. Anisotropy. It changes whether it is completely directional or omnidirectional. So how much do we let it bend with the orientation? So we have 100%, so it's completely one directional. If we start turning this down, we're going to get some noise. Yeah, it's going to start rotating of its own accord here. And we turn up that frequency, we get more or less. I don't know. It's going to take a little bit of time for me to get that good intuition, right? Like you read it once, doesn't mean you fully have it in your head and know how to use it exactly. You got to play around with it. And that's what we're here to do today. So, let's turn down the anisotropy. Yeah, and get more of that chaotic noise. Now all of those waves are going in every which direction. Orientation is more of a suggestion at this point than a guideline. Okay. So we'll definitely be keeping anisotropy closer to 1 than not, because a lot of the point of using this noise texture, in my opinion, is that we get these waves. We get these waves all going in a similar direction. I do want to play with bending the waves around, but I want control over that. We're not just going to let it go all omnidirectional on us. Okay. So we've read over the manual. I think there was maybe one more thing, but it was... yeah. Gabor noise is decomposed into we've got all of the different outputs where the Gabor value is computed as sine, the phase multiplied by the intensity, noting that the phase output is normalized to 0 to 1 range. Okay, so I guess it's really got 2 outputs, phase and intensity. And then the value is a sine of combination of those. Okay. Neat. Oh, okay. Also, I see. So they're talking about this in the context of shaders. So that's why we have single values for all of these things. Whereas in geometry nodes, we can have these as fields. I'm pretty sure most things in shaders don't like fields, which is why they're less common. But okay. Oh, this keeps going. It keeps going with examples and whatnot. The main advantage and use of the intensity output is that it provides information about the location of singularities in the phase output. Singularities are those areas in the phase where the bands meet. Okay, so all of these, what we were saying was the interleaving. And maybe I'm using that word wrong. Where the bands meet, which are shown in red in the following figure. Yeah, those areas will be close to zero in the intensity output. So if those areas are undesirable, they can be hidden by multiplying by a variant of the intensity output. Cool. Good to know. Good to know that there is a known method for getting rid of those if we need to. I like them personally, but we'll just kind of see how this goes as we ooh. Oh, that's beautiful. What? Inputs can be varied across space to get more interesting patterns. Yeah, and that's one of the things I want to do today is mess around with. Well, here they're using the position, geometry position, blah, 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 blah. Basically UVs for our purpose. Yeah, we're going to warp the UV space. Potentially based on other geometry in the scene. Depends on how well we get that figured out. But yeah, when you start playing around with the vector space for this noise, it gets really interesting really quickly, and I'm very much looking forward to that. But okay. Okay, so let's get into Blender proper now that we've taken a look at the node and explored what all the manual has to say, tried our best to take note of what all of the inputs and outputs really mean. Let's see. So first off, I do want to play around with just making it do sand beds, right? That's pretty basic and really just is the value output. So if we switch back to that, we got sand. Neat, right? That's maybe a little bit more intense than I would say for most like sandy patterns, but that's pretty good. We can of course control, maybe before multiplying this, we can control all of these values with a float curve node and get some more interesting shapes. Like if we want to get something a little pointier, let's turn this back up just a little bit so we can really see what we're doing. I think this is how you would get something that, yeah, builds up to one side and then dives off. No. Oh, I'm thinking of phase. Let's get phase in here. This will be easier to control because, yeah, this is taking the sine, so every curve we would put into here is going to get mirrored, essentially. And that's not what we want. No, I want to be able to control the shape of each wave using this curve. So if we put in the phase, we'll get that drop off. Let's just reset our values on this curve real quick. So this is the default of the phase. And now we can affect this with our curve. So each of these takes on this curve setting. And we can keep it from being super pointy by just making sure that we start and stop at 0. And then it'll just be pointy down here, unless, of course, we smooth out either side. And now we've got basically our value output, right? It's doing the nearly sine wave like distribution, yeah. But we have more control over this curve. And if I turn down the frequency just a touch, maybe turn down the scale too, it'll be easier to see the individual curves. Because, yeah, I like that. We've got our custom curve. And I don't know why you would have exactly this curve, but like it's whatever. I'm just showing that we can have as much control as we want to by doing this. But we have that, and we still have noise, right? Like this is squished, that's stretched. We have noise, we have interleaving here. I'm running with, that's what they mean. We have interleaving and singularities for all of this noise. And of course, we can turn this back down. Let's maybe make this 0.5. And now that's starting to look interesting to me. We can also, for the record, bring in more noise, and we're gonna want to do that a lot. Like that's how we build up more and more interesting textures, is by layering in various amounts of noise. So let's take this multiply, duplicate it, so that we can get the factor of this noise texture, multiply it by how we want this to be scaled, and then plug that in. So now we've got a little bit of extra noise. And yeah, it gives us the ability to like keep those bands, but bring in more noise. So this is going to be very much not what I expected. But we can turn down the scale of this, and that's more what I was thinking. Like this is starting to look more like dunes to me. I should pull up a reference if we were to start actually trying to construct dunes, but we're not. Not right now. And I mean dunes as in like the pattern going over the dunes, not literally the large scale structure of the dunes. The curly high height value coral kind of rock texture. Yeah, the like I think I know what you're talking about, where it's got a bunch of divots in the rock. Yeah, we can definitely get that kind of noise. Which, by the way, if anyone has some kind of rock texture or pattern that's like falls into this periodic kind of look, let me know, and we can try our hand at recreating that texture, that geometry. And I should clarify also, we're not making the materials right now and bringing in all that color information. Right now, we're just playing around with the geometry and getting shape. And I would highly encourage you to introduce smaller scale features with materials and shaders and all of that. It's just a lot more computationally efficient. Also, it sounds like the music stopped. Let me just check on that right quick. Okay. Okay. Hold on. There we go. Get that music back in. All right, so we've got a little bit of noise here. I kind of want to bring up this. And like that's interesting. It helps break everything up. And we haven't even started playing around with the vector or the orientation. There's so many things we can do. So many things we can do with this. Let's see. No, come back. I just wanted you to go away. There we go. So, okay. We've got like those sandy waves. Something I wanted to try out was making more rocks. So, let's make rocks in a hot second. First I want to maybe bring this back and get rid of those so that we have a little bit of a more sandy thing. Or do we like this better? I want to make some geometry with a sandy look with all these waves and whatnot, right? And then we'll set that aside, make some rocks, and then we'll mix them together. So, okay. I think this is at least good enough for now. So let's not group, but, put those in a frame and say sand bed. Just keep this labeled and cleaned and whatnot. And let's put in our set position too, so that we know what that set position does specifically, because I found one of the better ways to layer all of this noise together is to just do a bunch of set positions. Just over and over, we're going to set and then reset again. So, okay, we've got this, and we can set it aside, essentially. Let's get in another Gabor. And now I want to take a look at making some rocks, and I'll pull up a reference so that you know what I'm gonna go for, okay? Do. Honestly, let's just I'm making this again. Let's just duplicate this. Make our lives easier, right? Take a look at it, and now we can start playing around with these parameters, and let's go with rock layers for now. Just keep this organized and labeled, and so that we know what we're working on when we're working on whichever group. Oh, and real quick, just do some good housekeeping here. Set this as our initial geo. I have a tendency to get real messy with my nodes if I don't keep things labeled and keep on top of it as I go. Anyway, so let's bring up an example of what I want to make. So I have, yet again, here on Google Maps, I found this coastline that I think is really neat. And we'll look at closer up images here in a second, but I want to take a look at the large scale patterns. So this is over in France. I found this coastline, and what we've got here is obvious indications that we're seeing the layers of the rock where the rock's been upturned. So where normally we would have these layers all flat and horizontal, but through whatever means, because I'm not a geologist, through some kind of huge tectonic force, all of these rock layers have been upended, probably very suddenly and violently. And now they're being eroded by the ocean here. I assume this is ocean. Yeah, wait, I thought this was in France. I was told this was in France. Oh, is this one of those areas that France, like, actually owns? I thought all three of these islands were owned by Italy or sovereign. Anyway, no, go away. I don't need that. We were up here, right? Yeah, okay. So we have all of these exposed layers in the rock. And I love that. I love that look, and it's something that we should be able to achieve with the Gabor texture. So I kind of just want to show what we're going for. We're going for all of these exposed layers. I also want, some noise in like how far out into the water do we see these layers. It gives very linear, like everything about this is very linear, but still noisy and organic. I hesitate to say organic when I'm talking about geology, and that goes all along the coastline. We also have patches eventually, I think up here, where we have sandy beaches. So this is why we're not taking height data directly. I want more control over what kinds of formations we have where. And so as an artist, we can say, oh, okay, we'll have an outcrop like this on one side, we'll have a beach, and then we'll have another bit like that on the other side. As opposed to here, we would just be able to read that height data and go, well, that's a real world location, and this is very realistic. We just don't have any control over what what landforms we have for our scene. So pros and cons, right? I'm just taking the more artistic, the more art forward, art directionable approach, and trying to keep that in my head. So, like I said, that is blinding. Apologies. But I want to pull up some images of this kind of location, or at least what Google says is in this region of the world. And take inspiration. Hold on, I have no idea where that will actually go. Let's just take a look at this image here. Can I not make that bigger? Anyway, this is kind of what we would see, well, actually on the coast. And we can see here all of these layers a lot more clearly. These kind of get lost in that rocky, just like erosion pattern. I want those layers to be far more apparent in what we're making. Like maybe even becoming some larger scale structures. Like I don't see any C stacks and things like that sticking out into the coast on Google Maps, so we might stay away from that. But we do have these longer, more stretched out regions. So yeah, that's big long ramble about what I want to try and tackle next in order to make the landscape that I have in my head. So let's see if we can pull that off in Blender. So first off, we need to switch from value to phase because we want that 0 to 1 range and we want that jaggedness to be able to work with. Then I'm thinking, okay, we need to layer several of these together to get the effect that we see in nature, right? So let's see. Let's maybe get our UV map in. Hold on. Really? Oh, okay. I guess something to point out here. So you see how this vector doesn't have a dot. Anytime we have a diamond with a dot, that means that we're using one value, but this can accept a field. So it can accept a range of values. We don't have a dot here, so it is actively using a said range of values. If there's nothing input for all texture nodes and several other nodes, but all texture nodes at least, it uses the position of each vertex to operate on. When we plug in the UV map, now it's switching from, instead of a range from -1 to 1, we're going from 0 to 1. That's why this got, we got bigger features, so it looks like we zoomed in. It's because we're now using a smaller range of values than we were without this plugged in. So I guess there's not much point in using the UV map right now. We could just take the position, but in order to do anything fancy, we'll have to pull in our position node and bring in some vector math nodes. If I can spell. Okay, so let's take a look at our initial geometry and our position. So this is everything -1 to 1, right? Let's get some noise because this is how we're actually going to stretch out the Gabor texture, because right now we only have it's largely evenly spaced ridges. And I want some ridges to be wider, some to be smaller, more than the texture is already giving us. So we take our position and we're going to add in some noise, but we have to be careful because this is pretty wild noise. Actually, could we do another Gabor texture? Let's start off with just using a noise texture. So what we're going to do is plug that into our vector math node and decide, okay, what is it we're going to do? No, I'm going to change my mind as I'm explaining what we're doing. We'll see if we need vector math. Let's just start with plugging color directly into vector. This is going to be crazy because we have a lot of noise going on right now. So let's scale that down. I don't want that much variation in our Gabor texture, at least for the time being. So with this scaled down, we're just going to go with 0.5, give it a nice round value. This is normalized, so 0 to 1. Let's just see how that is, and we'll adjust it if we don't like it. So that's not exactly what I was hoping for. Okay, so now let's be a little bit more mindful. So we have 4 outputs in a color output. We have RGBA, and I think we just need 2. So this is where we're going to start pulling in vector math nodes, and I'm going to get rid of unnecessary nodes because, again, I want to keep this clean. Anyway, we're going to multiply this so that we have just x and y. Did that change anything? Okay, I guess it wasn't using the z. Shows what I know, I guess. Okay, so we've got that. Let's actually stretch out our noise. So we've got noise, we've multiplied it. We can take the x and stretch it out like this. Helps if I actually inspect the correct node. So, okay, we can stretch it out like this. And we're stretching on the x, but that's just kind of bringing up our values. And right now, it's kind of hard to tell because that's just a gross yellow-green blob. Let's set this to normalize so it's easier to see what our separate channels are doing. And if we stretch this out, no, that's going to stretch the values. We need to... This is something I have to deal with all the time. The difference between adjusting the values after the noise texture and before, because I can never keep it straight. So I always have to play with one and then go, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. What we want to do is stretch out these values before going into the noise texture. So let's plug this in. Let's get our position node back in. And now we can say, okay, we're going to stretch this on the X. It looks like I'm compressing it. It's just a frame of reference. So we can really stretch it on the Y. Why don't we do that? No, I liked having more noise like this. Okay. So we've got this more stretched out. Now, if we normalize this, it doesn't look like there's a ton going on. Let's see how that affected our Gabor texture, and I don't think this multiply is doing anything, so let's get rid of it to be a little bit more computationally efficient. And okay, that's interesting, but still a little bit much. So maybe it will be that we want to use a Gabor texture after all, which I guess makes sense because we want to increase the number of octaves is usually what you call that for noise. We want to basically add small scale features to large scale features. So we have one octave that is noise going very smoothly, but very big structure. And then we have another noise that has a lot of smaller features that gets added on top. So now we have like this combination of noise. I'm gesturing. I should just be blending. So, okay, let's take our Gabor texture. And I'm trying to think, how do we want to get these large scale features? I guess what we can do is have a value that controls the orientation of both of these textures. So now we can increase that. Oh, and here's another key thing to keep in mind. So often when a node says degrees, we can adjust this and it'll be in degrees. But if we plug in a value node, now suddenly it's interpreting this as radians. So if we want to still play with this in terms of degrees, we need a math node. And we need to switch to 2 degrees. That way we can... Hold on a second. I got to think through. Okay, we're starting in degrees. It needs to get converted into radians. I was right the first time. We set this to radians. So now we can type in degrees. And as I just scroll through here, it's rotating much more slowly. So, okay, we had it at like 56. It was just a random value. But now it's a lot easier to understand. So like we can go from 0 and then scroll all the way up to 90, and now it's perpendicular-ish, and then back around to 180, and it's just flipped it around. Just a demonstration of why this works, why/how. Anyway, we've got that at 45. We've got that controlling both textures, which is very good. So now let's turn down the scale. So we've got some larger scale wrinkles, ridges, what have you. It's still not quite giving very much variation in the width of each one, which is why we started playing around with the position. But it just didn't do it very much. I guess part of the problem could be that I plugged in a noise texture. What if we just take the position and multiplied it by whatever and ran that in as our vector? So now if we stretch this, okay. Oh. No, that wouldn't quite work. So we're stretching it per axis in this case. And that's not really what I want. I want to stretch and compress all of our ridges so that we get a region of more ridges and then a region of fewer ridges. How would we go about that? I would say we could plug this Gabor texture into the vector here, but none of these are vectors, and it can be a little bit difficult to convert those values into vectors. Why don't we... We could take those as the scale of a vector. I don't know, and maybe I'm hyperfixating on something that really doesn't matter that much, because I guess at the end of the day, if we just add these two textures together, we would get variation in I think a similar way as what I'm imagining. So let's just try that before overcomplicating everything. Let's just take this phase and that phase, add them together. We'll of course need to remap this so that we can actually see what the heck's going on and get rid of that vector. Interesting, okay. That is interesting. I don't know that I like it overlapping with... Well, I don't know. Let's try, instead of add, multiply, so we can see it a little bit more clearly. And let's use that. No, we don't want to just use this, or view that. Let's use this as the Z for our set position. And of course, because it's multiplied, it's going to get crazy. But that is pretty darn similar to what I'd like. I still want more variation here, which means we're just going to have to warp the input vector, the position vector. But we'll do that in a hot second. First, let's get this into something that's a little bit more visually pleasing. So, okay, we've multiplied this. I kind of want to get this back into the 0 to 1 range. Is it in the 0 to 1 range? I guess technically it is still in the 0 to 1 range. When you multiply, you shouldn't get anything above 1 if there isn't anything above 1. So, okay, never mind. We don't need to remap any of this. We're good, actually. So let's just take this multiply that scales it down to a range that we like and drop that in. Cool. And now, of course, because it is multiplied together, we have multiple octaves going on. Let's just double that. And it's starting to get interesting. I'm not sure 100% how much I like that. I think... Let's maybe turn if we turn the frequency down to 0. No, I was just thinking, like, okay, in this case, I don't necessarily want these singularities and interleaving. I think the manual, it had an explanation. If I could tab over to the right window, I think it had an explanation for getting rid of those. Where did it explain about these? Okay. Okay, so intensity gives us information about the location of singularities. And so down here... Oh, okay. Yeah, they used intensity, used a less than and then a multiply with a mix to highlight all of those regions. How would we go about getting rid of them, though? We don't want to get rid of anisotropy, but but it doesn't, turning all the way up to 1 doesn't fully get rid of those singularities. If we turn down the frequency, it gets weird. I think we might just have those, and if that's the case, I'm not going to worry about it too much. Let's just keep playing with the shape for now. Yeah, because I think the next thing we'd want to do is really play around with the input vector to get some differences in how thick these layers are. No, those singularities are really bothering me. Like, I'd like more... I want continuous layers. Like, hold on. Let's pull up a reference. Why don't we? Let's just go with rock layers. Google, give me some images. Like, that's gonna give us kind of what I figured. A lot of sandstone, sedimentary rock. Which isn't exactly what we're looking at in this case. Or maybe it is. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not a geologist, but yeah, here we go. Okay, this looks a lot like the gray stone that we were looking at. You can see there's really not too many singularities. Wherever it warps and bends, they kind of all warp together. So maybe that is a case where we would want to use some trig instead of this noise texture, because trig won't really give you, like, if we just make a bunch of sine waves, it won't really give you those singularities. Interesting. But we can still use that Gabor for warping and layering and all kinds of fun things. Like, I guess, really, what I want to see is some bent layers more than singularities. Like, if we could get it to bend, that would be really fun. So, okay, let's maybe play around with that for a moment. So we've got our position, right? Let's get rid of this set position. Let's just look at the grid for a moment. So we've got our position, and we've got a noise texture. Maybe we could... Oh, that's something. We could use the factor of this noise texture. Instead of trying to play around with the vector that we're inputting into this Gabor texture, we could use the factor for orientation. So let's get rid of that input for a moment. Take a look at phase in it. And what if we put factor in there? Of course, like I said, that's going to give us a value in, or it expects a value in radians. So if that's in radians, we need to map this range. Map it or just multiply it? I think we can just multiply it. We need to multiply this by either pi or tau. That'll give us something closer to what we want. Like, we need to define how much does a value of 0 mean it's going to be what angle does a value of 0 mean, and what angle does a value of 1 mean? That's easier to visualize, in my opinion, using a map range node, because then we literally have values for minimum and maximum. Although we could achieve the same thing with just a multiply node, and it'd probably be a little bit more efficient. But for clarity, let's put in a map range node. Okay, so right now this is spitting out 0 to 1. So these are set correctly. Now let's go 0 to pi. So that should be a full 180 range of values. That's maybe too much. So instead, let's do pi over 2. And now we're bending only 90 degrees at the most. If we turn up the scale on this texture, we might be able to see that. Now it still looks... Hold on. It's bending at most that much, yeah, but it's determined by the noise texture, how much it's doing it. So if we take a look at this, there's a very small range of values on this noise texture. So we need to turn up the scale. No. Hold on. We don't see a lot of range. So maybe let's turn off normalize and say from -1 to 1. Will that look the same or just different? I don't... No, this should be the same operation. Yeah. I'm just trying to think, okay, we've got this input. I want it to bend with the, like, very obviously bend with the values that we're inputting here for orientation. Maybe we should just pull in a float curve node. That's what we should do. Okay. Float curve, and now we can see more drastically, maybe, like... where it's 1, we want it to be 1. Maybe let's give it some hard fall off. I just want to see, okay, there's a transition here. If we make it a more stark transition, we'll be able to see how the values bend when we put it into the Gabor node, the Gabor texture. Okay. So now we have more control, and we can get a more subtle bending. We can get a more steep bending. That's interesting. That's very interesting, and I like it a lot. Okay, and of course we can scale that up and get more noise. We can scale it down, but I like this size of structure. That's something we really have to pay attention to, is when we just have noise, what's the scale of that noise? Because that'll determine how, like, what scale of structure we're making, right? I just want one big bend, and that's kind of what we've got here. But if we turn it up, it'll just turn into clusters of bending every which way. So cool. That's also a good place to maybe do some painting, and we can paint in our own custom, okay, we want it to face this way in this region, that way in that region. Color ramp node. I mean, yeah, same thing. Color ramp node gives us a lot more information, right? So like we can adjust the whole color range, but right now we're just using a single float, so we don't need a vector, we don't need a color, and it can be a lot easier to visualize what's going on. I all the time use color map nodes as if it were float curves, and that's kind of just a habit I got from using Houdini. I think once my professor introduced the color ramp node and kind of explained how to use it more than a curve, And so I just kind of got locked into that mentality. But for things like this, I prefer using the float curve because you have this nice visualization of how those values are changing. Because yeah, if you're not familiar, we move from 0 to 1, and so it'll slow. In this case, it'll slowly, as the value is 0, it'll output along this curve. So we'll get pretty low values, and then suddenly we'll get higher and higher values, and then slowly we'll get much larger values. Anyway, I'm over explaining this. Uh, we've got this float curve that's adjusting the orientation of our Gabor texture. Let's turn that scale back down, and we can see much more stark disconformities. I think that's the term you say in geology. I don't really know. It becomes a lot more stark. Whereas if we increase our scale, that looks like a much smoother transition from one orientation to the other. I'm sorry, I forgot I set an alarm. How professional of me. Anyway. So if we turn this scale back down, maybe we make this less sharp of a turn, and we can also, I put in, proportions of pi. We can have this be whatever we want to, so if we turn that, I don't like how much those are all rotating. I don't know. This is where it does turn into just art, right? Like you've got the theory, but now you got to just play with the various values. Anyway, that looks interesting to me. And maybe we should use this to control the orientation of both Gabor textures. Because if we take a look at the set position node, we now have this interesting pattern going on, but they're not all moving in the same way, right? So let's take this, plug it into, no, not the phase. I want to take this, the orientation for our larger Gabor texture, plug it into the smaller one, and now we've got some interesting octaves going. We've got a lot of variation in how these layers are being broken up and warped and all of that. So let's turn this scale back down so we have those larger scale structures, and maybe instead of just multiplying them together directly, let's add in another multiply node. And of course now that's going to shrink everything, but I just want a difference in our large scale features and our small scale features. I guess we could also increase the scale for the smaller ones so that we get a lot of smaller features. But our large scale features are getting lost in the sauce here. So how do we fix that? If we scale all of this down, it's going to change the overall scale of all of it. I think what we need to do is add them together and then say, okay, theoretically we could use a map range node. It would get a little bit complicated. Let's see if we can just remap this from whatever range this is to the 0 to 1 range real quick with using a little bit of math. So we've added them together. So the maximum of these two added is going to be basically this value plus 1. Since this hasn't been adjusted, that's just 1. So we can take a value node to drive this value. I'm just going to type in, say, 1.5. Then we'll do, well, if I can type, nah, that's fine. So we'll plug that in. That's going to be the multiply for this Gabor texture. Then we can say we'll have some value that's going to adjust this one. We're just going to set that to 1 right now, but we're also going to bring in another value node and say that that's 1. Then we can use that for the multiply here, And we can use that here, and we're going to add these two values together. What that allows us to do is say, okay, that's the maximum of the maximum value that these two textures could have when they're added together. And we need to take that and basically scale it back down into the 0 to 1 range. So maybe now we can use a map range node. I said earlier, like, yeah, it would get complicated. I was imagining using a statistics attribute node to like have it just automatically find the minimum and maximum of all of this added together, but we can just do some basic math to find that, as we've done here. Anyway, so the minimum is always going to be 0. Plug this in for our value, turn off clamp. So the minimum is always going to be 0, the maximum is going to be this, and then we'll leave this as 0 to 1 because we want the output to be 0 to 1. Then we plug that into our multiply, and there we go. If we turn our multiply back up to 1 and take a look at this from the side, we have successfully remapped this to be 0 to 1 no matter what the multiplier is for either of these. I mean, obviously, if we go below 0, things get a little bit wonky, but now we can independently adjust the height of our large scale features and our small scale features, which is really good. Like, we have that turned up to 2. We can leave this at 0.45 because I'm feeling like it. And now we can turn down the overall multiply, and we have this interesting combination of values and layers. The big question is this what we want? Is this what we're going for visually? And not just yet. I think what we're going to want to do is mimic the value of our texture here, but we're actually going to use phase. What does that mean, Gavin? It means, and maybe I should pull. Let me see if I can explain where I'm going while I'm organizing. So what I mean is that we're going to do the trick that we did earlier of using a float curve node with our phase to remap how all of these move across the geometry. Because right now it is just 0 to 1. It's a very flat gradient. And we want to be able to control that gradient. We could just use value, but that'll give us a sine wave, which is also a 0 to 1 output, but it gets a little bit harder to control because sine waves then, like, they go from 0 up to 1 and then back down to 0 before repeating. So we'll get mirrored values, mirrored curves if we were to use that. So instead we'll continue to use phase, but bring in some custom shapes, some custom curves. Okay, I'm just about done cleaning this up. I want to leave this separate, but I'm not sure what to label it as of yet. Oh, I completely forgot. We're using stretched values for our vector input here. What happens when we take that out? Okay, it becomes less stretched. So we can use that to stretch our values later. For right now, I think we're good. I'd also say we should, if we're going to use that, we should use it for both Gabor textures. And I should label these textures. So this is going to be large scale. This is going to be small scale. There we go. Nice, nice, nice. Make it so we can actually read all that. Okay. And just real quick before bringing in curves, like I was just saying, I want to just see how that scales. Yeah, that's a lot nicer when we see it with both of them. that it feels like we have a lot more control. That's really nice. It's really nice, and I like it. Okay. Ooh, and I just had another idea for an even larger scale thing. But first, let's do what I was just promising to do. Bring in a float curve. Hey, Max. How's it going? Hope you're having a good Monday. Do. Make a little bit more room here so we have space for our curves. I know housekeeping isn't the most entertaining thing, but it's a necessary evil. Okay, I think we've got plenty of space to bring in some curves. So let's bring in a float curve here and a float curve there. I wish there was a good way to like take the different points on our curves and like if we had inputs and outputs for all of the different points, that would be really nice. Or if you could use drivers. I think you can technically use drivers. I hesitate to use drivers in geometry nodes because when you duplicate things or like I think it's when you duplicate the node graph as a whole, not all of the drivers get preserved every time. So you can set up a lot of complicated logic and then it doesn't transfer over when you go to use this in another project. Anyway, I wanted to bring this in so that we could have a little bit more control with all of those curves. Let's bring in another smooth shade, set shade smooth, just because it looks a little bit nicer. Can you use one Gabor texture just on y-axis to make the rock lines that the like the photo you were searching for? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you could definitely do that. Well, just on the y. Like yeah, you could definitely yes. Okay. I'm thinking about how to explain some of that. So yes, you're absolutely right. However, it does put on some limiters, so I guess maybe I should explain like do this with a slightly simpler one before really ramping up, but I'm just kind of going, right? The difference is you would just get very linear textures, very linear noise. Whereas here, I want to be able to warp it too. So it'll get distorted and all of that. Even though some of the references I was looking at are very linear, I'm kind of setting this up to be more general so that we can adjust it a lot more and have more control in the future. So even though a lot of those warping and whatnot would be larger than necessarily the scale we're looking at right now, this is a much more general application. I hope that makes sense. The way it is right now, there's some method to resample and add more vertices at the walls. Ooh. So you're getting a little ahead of me. I haven't mentioned this yet, but that is something I want to do ideally towards the end of the stream after we've kind of taken a look at a lot of the general applications and kind of just using this in general. But there are ways to add geometry to the sides. I'm not going to resample, but there are ways to get some of that horizontal offset, not just the y-axis. We can have it come back in, right? And the way you would do that is with volumes. You could take volumes and use these textures to determine the density, and then based on the density, create a mesh out of that. And like I said, I'll get into that in a minute. I'm not going to explain that at the moment, but you're absolutely right. And that is something that I want to do because having that hard cutoff is pretty ugly and unrealistic. and we need to do something about it. Anyway, okay, so we've got one curve. Let's get another one in. I don't really love either of these curves, but they help bring in some noise. And maybe this is way too much. Maybe we need to turn down the scale and have fewer of these. I don't like that as is, but maybe I'll like it if we stretch it on the X. Yeah, that's not the best, but there are so many things that we can do to adjust it and get it to be better. It can be hard to know which one's most worth our time. Okay, that's not exactly what I want, but it's also not the worst. Okay. Yeah, and I think this is kind of the pattern that would be better for a much larger scale sort of thing. Or maybe we just need to do something like that and adjust our multiplication. So I've got this up to 2. Let's make that less intense, perhaps, and proportionally make this more intense. No. Let's go with like something kind of like that for now. That's pretty darn extreme. Yeah, okay. That's getting better. I think I just had the smaller detail turned way too far up. Yeah, and we're running into some resolution problems. Like, we only have so many vertices. So it's starting to look a little weird because of that. So, let's turn this scale down a little bit more so that the smaller details don't look as bad when they're more pronounced. Yeah. And with everything in Blender, everything here, all of these are fields. So we can also play around with adding in some noise, some very light noise to break up some of the uniformity of how deep some of these grooves are. I do want to keep this value, or at least a value, off to the side to be able to adjust the overall scale of it. Right, so if we bring in another multiply, so we have a noise texture here. I'm going to switch this to 4D so that we have a W value to act as a seed, just so that we don't get literally the same noise texture as this noise texture. And we're going to take this, multiply it by this value. Let's just copy that right quick. And then we can drop this in for the multiply for, which one was that? The small scale. And now we can turn that up, but we have we have some variation. I don't like anything to be overly uniform if we can avoid it, because there's noise in everything in the real world. The more noise you can have, the better, so long as you know how to control that noise, because it gets out of hand very quickly. So, okay, we can turn up this scale. And this is another place where we could have a float curve so that we can control the drop-off of all of that noise. So let me just real quick see how this looks with a pretty sharp example. Let's have that be pretty linear, right? So taking a look at this, like, we just smoothed out the majority of our details. It went very small very quickly. Yeah, let's turn that up so that we can see it a little bit easier. Maybe set that to 0. There we go. Okay, now we can see a little bit more easily what this is controlling. So we have patches where we have no small details and patches where we have larger details. We can then just smooth this out by adjusting how our handles are here and say, okay, we want some patches where there's not much, maybe some quick fall off, and then we'll have a lot of it here. We do need to be careful of where these 2 points are relative to each other. The closer they are, the faster it'll drop off and all that. And also the more of the higher region here, the more we'll have of one value versus the other, right? I hope that makes sense. Like, that's because it's so stark of a drop off. We'll have a lot of values that are very similar and then drop off a lot of values that are very similar. But I would rather have maybe, like, I want some drop off where it's just, okay, that's all one value, but I also want this to be smoother. I don't know if that makes sense. And if we turn this down, we'll see, okay, yeah, that's looking pretty good with some variation there. It's not all the same amount of contrast. I say it's looking pretty good. I mean, this is hot garbage yet, but we haven't plugged it into the application that we're going to have here in a minute. And I'm thinking that we're going to need to increase the size of this grid to get something that really looks good. Because taking all of this detail and then just scaling it all down, we'll lose all of the detail we just made. So it'd be better to make the grid bigger, but then we have a lot more geometry to handle, which can be problematic. Anyway, let's do that. Oh, right, this is the value that we were using to derive all of this. I guess let's put this in this group. Not 100% sure if that's exactly what I want to do, but yeah, let's give it a try. Or I'm just thinking through my organization. Do we want this in this? I think we do. I think it'll be good. Anyway, we could do the same with our large scale features, and then we'll get some more variation, because looking at this right now, it's very flat at our extremes, right? Like if we turn this back up to just 1, which isn't much of a difference. Hold on. Is that adding those together correctly? For our map range node? I don't think it is, because now we're getting a range nearly between 0 and 2. Huh. Something to come back to later. We don't need to fixate on that right now. We're just going to take all of this and duplicate it. Give this a different W value and use this for the large scale features. So taking that over. Okay. Did that do what I expected it to do? Let's turn up the scale. No? Doesn't look like it's giving us as much variation as I was hoping for. Hold on. Hold on. Do I have these backwards? Oh, no. We just got rid of this input. Yeah, okay. This is why organization's important. I just plugged all of this in wrong. Oh, that's so good. That's actually so good. That gives us a lot more breakup. All those little details. It looks a lot less uniform. Our large scale features are still pretty uniform. Do we need to turn up this scale? It doesn't look like that's affecting a scale as much as I thought it would. Or maybe I'm just thinking through it wrong. But like I was saying, we get a lot more detail in there, and now it's starting to look a lot more interesting. Just a lot more interesting. If we... Yeah, no, that's kind of what I thought. Do I have this backwards? I think I have this backwards. This is telling it where there can and can't be detail, the detail of these smaller structures. This is the small scale. Maybe I need to put all of this into the small scale label so that it's easier for me to see what's going on. And if you didn't know you could do this, let's give this a custom color. I don't want it to be too much, but I want to be able to see what all is in the small scale section here. So, okay. You're in here and you're... No, you're not. This is where you guys combine. Okay, cool. So let's... No, I don't want large scale to contain small scale. Stop it. Give this a color. It can be the same color. I think I might just make it the same color for the time being. There we go, because it's more important that we know what all nodes are in what group than be able to really distinguish the two, if that makes sense. I just want to know which group of nodes does everything need to eventually need to be grouped together. Okay, let's grab these, pull them out a little bit. So, okay, this all should also belong to the small scale group. There we go. So, okay, this is looping down and then coming back up, so we can just replace that. There we go. Then we can take all of this. No, I didn't want to duplicate that. Drag it into the large scale group. There we go. Okay, okay. Replace this. Move that back. There we go. Cool. And now we just need to grab these two reroute nodes, pull them out to the side, because those are for our adds. Get rid of that extra value node. Cool. I think that's housekeeping done. Yeah. Okay. Okay, okay. So we've got those added together. We've got these values added together for our map range. Cool. Okay. How do we now take... Or I'm sorry, how are these noise texture nodes actually affecting the Gabor nodes? We need to see... make sure that these are all connected correctly. And I think that's maybe part of our problem. There we go. Okay, yeah, I was like, something's not connected correctly. Where the heck is it? I found it. It was this multiply needed to be brought into the add to make sure that our range was correct. But okay. That's good. Except, of course, that's not getting mapped correctly. Is it because this... No. Oh, what the heck is going on here? Why is this being weird now? I don't want this to be weird. And this is, like I was saying a moment ago, this is where I can get myself into a bit of a corner because I've included so many controls. It can get really easy to forget which ones do exactly what. So, okay. Oh. Oh, we're taking from this multiply node. Do we need to take from this multiply node? No, but now I've just completely ruined everything. I think that was what just changed everything. Yeah, we really did want to take it before multiplying them together. Okay. Okay, this is starting to make more sense again. Nice. Okay. Okay. We've got our large-scale features. We've got our small-scale features. We've got this controlling our small-scale features, right? I guess I should be playing with the value as opposed to the curve. Cool. Okay, I don't think I ever want this to really go up to 1. Or is that not controlling what I think it's controlling? Ah! Oh my goodness gracious. So many controls. Why have I done this to myself? Okay. That's fully up to... Oh my goodness gracious. Multiplying everything together. It gets confusing as to what controls what. What was it that made it so that all of this went smooth? I know I just set it up a minute ago. But now I've gotten lost in the sauce. Okay, so this is definitely the correct control, okay, for the amount of, for the overall height offset of the small scale details. We don't want that above 1. We also don't want that below 0. I think we can adjust just so that I stop messing that up. I guess we can't. Never mind. I was going to say we can set a minimum, but I guess that's only for group inputs. And for the record, you could group all of these together so that you have basically one set of nodes that you can just duplicate. The problem in this case is that we have all of these different curves, and I want to be able to control those individually. So in order to do that, we have to leave them out here. Otherwise, if we just make a group, then we'd have to make a bunch of different groups and hop into each one to control the curves, and it's a whole thing. So we're just gonna not worry about it. I really do feel like this is our problem, right? Like, I don't want it to fully smooth out. Right, I need to stop playing with this curve and this curve. These are for the overall shape of the texture. This is for how much we're mixing between high and low values, right? Oh, yeah, it is, which is why, okay. That's what it was. Okay, so in this float curve, it dipped all the way down to 0, which means that we got rid of a bunch of detail and spots, which is what I said I wanted earlier. But we can't multiply by 0 because then we just get fully nothing, and I don't want it, I guess, to fully drop down to nothing. So, in order to fix that while still maintaining full use of this range, we can go ahead and give this another math node, switch it to add, and just add the smallest possible amount. That'll be our minimum value for this node group. This will ensure that we have some value everywhere to control, and we always have details. The curve gives us more or less details depending on where we're at with our noise, but the add makes sure that it never dips below 0, or dips at it. It keeps it above 0. Anyway, moving on. We've got all kinds of detail here, which is fantastic. Maybe bump that up just a smidge. That was too much of a smidge. 0.05. like that. Okay. Adding in more and more controls, ever more controls. Nope, that's not the right float curve. We need to label things more. Okay. Main curve, detail, control. I don't, oh, right, I have to actually give it a frame in order to give it that label. Okay. Detail control. There we go. Maybe that'll help me to keep all of this stuff straight. Also helps if I spell well. Okay. Let's give ourselves a little bit more space to work because I need to bring this down now. Cool. Okay. So we've got various controls. We have an add here. Let's also give this an add just to have parity with all of this stuff. I'd really love it if Blender gave us curves as an input, like be able to use this curve as an input into the group so that I could have one node group that's duplicated, but then control of all of the curves. The way it is right now, there's some method to resample and add more oh, sorry. No, I read that earlier. I thought I saw a new chat come in, but I did not. Anyway. We've added 0.2 for all of this so that we can have, minimum values. Sounds good. I think I want more detail here as we go. Anyway, okay, that's all looking good. The only thing is, I did want to break up the maximum amount of our large features. This is our small scale. Okay, large scale. Because right now, they're just kind of... Okay, am I going crazy? Hold on. Do these two values do the same thing? I was trying to control the larger scale features. Do those do the same thing? They look like they're behaving in the same way. That's perplexing. That's very perplexing. Do we only need one curve to control the detail? But these are different noises. Why does... Why the heck would that work like that? What a weird time. Okay. Just perplexing. Anyway, I think what I want to do is take the curve that we have for our larger scale noise, make it a little bit rounder, so that it's largely the small scale that adds some more drastic contrast. Add some more of that in. Okay. Yeah, this is overall adding in detail. This adds in more or less detail based on the noise. Yeah, that's a flat add. That's scale. If that makes sense. I really hope that makes sense. Okay. Okay. I think this is looking neat. It's looking very neat. And let's see if we can add just one more so that we get these larger scales, we get the smaller scales, but then we're starting to get some noise for like the coastline. Okay. Moving back into the point of all of this, the point of the stream, actually making a beach, which reminds me. Yeah, okay. This controls the orientation. Kind of want to see what happens when we play with this now that we've got some interesting noise in here. That doesn't seem to do as much as I'd like it to, but maybe that's because we're using a much smaller grid than I'd like to at this point. So let's increase the size of our grid, go into a 10 by 10 grid. We're going to save this. Remember to save your project. And I want to increase the amount of vertices on the grid. That's going to make this run a lot slower, but let's just start off small, add another 100 by 100, so 1,000 points. Can we add another 1,000 points before it gets choppy? It looks like it. It looks a lot like it. Okay. Let's go one more so that we have parity with the size of the grid, and that looks pretty good. Our features are starting to look extreme, so at this scale we can turn some of that down, and now it's really becoming apparent. Well, no. I think this looks good. I think it looks good. I'd like the orientation to change a little bit. Can we turn down this scale? Let's take a look at this scale on the flat grid. Okay, we've got this very stretched. Let's maybe turn down the stretching and not turn down the scale. I think what we need to do is just adjust the curve. So let's take a look at the curve and see. Okay. With that higher bit of contrast, let's take a look at how that's affected the grid and get rid of looking at this. Okay, that's gotten interesting. That's really gotten interesting. Let's tone that down just a little bit, I think. Yeah, there's a harder edge here for that orientation. I'm not sure how I feel about this. But this is getting way closer to what I was looking for, to, layers of Earth that have just been upended and squished and rotated and turned around. Okay. I think what we should do. I kept saying how I wanted thicker and thinner layers. We've kind of got that here, but it just dawned on me. We can take the global scale or the the frequency and make that also be a field. Okay. So let's bring in one more noise texture, do kind of a similar setup here, but I want it to be based on a different value. Let's give it the same vector, and by value I mean like give it a different seed. So W, we'll change that to be something different. Let's also change that to 4D. Whew, and that changes that up quite a bit. Yeah, there we go. Let's see how that looks. Let's also change the group output here so that we know if we just delete this node, we'll see the end result here. That looks interesting. That looks really interesting. Okay. Okay. Let's maybe change this to 0.5. Just nice round numbers if we can make sure that it looks good. Let's change this to 0.5. Basically just duplicate all of this. And yeah, get this set up to go in to our scale. The only thing is, instead of mapping this to whatever, like the same value here, we need to make sure that we keep the current frequency in mind. So we're going to go from 0, not even 0. I want a range of values. So let's do a little bit more math. Let's get a value in. This is going to be the center of our range here, and then we're going to define the spread. So let's do that. Let's say the center is at 3, because I think that's roughly what our scale is set to. 3 or 4, we're going to turn that up to 4. And then say, okay, subtract. We're going to take our 4, subtract whatever our range is. So we'll say that the range is going to be 1. So we'll subtract 1 and we'll add 1. And that'll be our minimum and our maximum. We're going to get rid of clamp there. We don't need that anymore because our orientation is determined here. Let's plug this into our frequency. Okay. Did I want frequency or scale? I think scale. And this is for our small features? Okay. So now we can change the spread. Yeah, there we go. Okay, we get some compression, we get some stretching. We can change this and just kind of bring in how much that does that over the whole thing. And now we can really, oh, that's so good. Oh, that's so good. Okay, I think we need to turn this down maybe a little bit. No. Or maybe I just need to hone in some of these values here. Because I don't like how much that's gotten compressed. But I do like this. That looks very good in my opinion. It does, however, highlight how much of this noise is coming through in each layer, and I don't really like that. And we're gonna turn down the spread and then figure out, okay, how do we get that noise out of there? Also, the music has stopped again. I switched up the music slightly, so I guess this playlist wasn't quite as long. There we go. Cool. I just want something nice to listen to. Okay, so we've got this compressed and then stretched again. I think, I don't know how much I like that noise texture being so apparent. I thought it would be less, but I don't know. Is it this one that brings that down? No. And this is why I need to label these things before I break everything. Okay. Man, I can't tell you how happy I am with that. Like, that's really what I was hoping for. And now I think we just need to maybe create a value that adjusts the overall scale of both of these. Yeah, because we've got them set to the same thing. I just want to be able to maybe make all of these details smaller, and that's perhaps why we're getting so much of that noise in, because it looked good when these were real thin bands. If we can make this smaller again, whew, that's getting a little more wild than I want it to. But it's interesting. It's so interesting. Okay, let's turn down the spread of all of that, I think. Okay. You know, that's maybe something we could do here too. Take all of this. So that's controls for... Where did we plug that into? Scale? Okay. So this is scale spread. Now let's duplicate all of this so that we can control the spread of the orientation as well. Label this orientation spread. There we go. Plug that into there. And that looks different. Okay, so do we need to increase or decrease? Yeah, why did that get all wonky on us all of a sudden? Okay, never mind. I'll play around with that later. I like this and I want this. So. Yeah, why would that do that? Anyway, like I said, I'll play around with that later, see if we can get something interesting. For now, let's run with this. I like the look of this. Let's add in one more layer, which is going to be our beach layer, or our coast layer, I think is what we should call this. So we're going to duplicate all of this. And we're going to call this coast scale. Cool. So what this is going to do, and we're going to get rid of offsetting our position for a moment. What this is going to do is give us the line between land and sea. And because I want it to still be pretty jagged, we're going to keep using the Gabor texture. But we need to bring it up to a much larger scale. And in fact, we don't need to have the same kind of orientation. This can be much more linear. But we're going to make sure that it's rotated 90 degrees. Yeah. We're going to make sure that it's 90 degrees, and we're going to bring in, I think, one more just noise texture, just have kind of like Perlin, or this is FBM, so therefore it's fractal Brownian motion. That's what FBM stands for. Had to think about it for a hot second. But let's bring this up, and we're going to unnormalize this and bring in a different mapping for our position. Because we have it stretched that way, I want it to be stretched the other way. So we're going to go like that, go like this, have it stretched like that. Great, wonderful. No, we need a little bit more control. So we're going to separate out our XYZ and get a sine wave that's going to go along our X here. I guess I've been looking at this a little bit backwards. Not backwards, but just in a weird orientation. Let's look at it like this. So our beach is going to go land to sea along the x-axis. So we need some math. We're going to take the x position. What is the scale that we're working at? It is 5. So -5 to +5 is our mapping here. And if I were smart, I'd use this parameter to drive this, but we're just doing this live. So instead, I'm just going to drop in a map range node. And we're going to manually type in that this is -5 and going to go to +5. And now it's going to go from 0 to pi because we're going to plug in sine, not cosine, sine. And let's take a look at those values. That's all positive and hard to read. Do cosine? Cosine. Yeah, because I wanted to start at 1 and go down to 0. Down to -1. Right. Okay. So we have that. And we can take this and multiply it with some noise. Let's just take a look at the noise real quick. Yeah, the noise is going in a similar direction. I think we want the noise to go perpendicular, so we're actually going to flip these back around. There we go, and we will multiply these together. Not going to take cosine of cosine. We're going to multiply this and our noise. No, or just add. Let's just add to it. So now we have this line, but it's broken up by that noise, that stretched noise. We could have gone for a Gabor. Maybe should have gone for Gabor. And honestly, yeah, this is a little bit simpler, and I think that's going to keep us from overcomplicating that. So let's just get rid of some of that detail and take a look at what do these values look like? So we are stretching mostly in this direction. So I think we're doing good as far as that matters. So let's just take this and multiply it with that, and that should be a good enough mix. I guess we could technically also bring in some mix nodes. I don't know why I haven't been playing around with mix nodes. I found those are also pretty nice for this sort of a workflow, but okay, so that's multiplying all of that together. So we should see like high to low and some breakup and rocks jutting out into some low space. I don't know. Let's see what happens. Okay, not quite exactly what I was hoping for, which means not all is lost. We just need another float curve. Let's do a float curve and get a little bit more control over what's going on here. We need steeper fall off, but we need that to come further out. I'm thinking, yeah, that's interesting, but it's not based on where this noise is, and I think that's really the thing that we're missing here. Like, just having some random noise is fine, so I guess we will bring in these factors. And yeah, instead of using this noise, we're not doing that. We're just going well, right now we just have cosine plus 0.5, which is nothing. That looks so much flatter than it feels like it should be, right? Is it just me, or does that just look linear? No, we've got some curve to it. Okay. Okay. I guess if I plugged in tau, there we go. Now we can see some of that curve, but we're going from -1 to 1, 0 to tau. If we plug in negative pi to pi, yeah, that flips that around. I guess we get sine in here. I did want it to go the other direction, though, so pi to negative pi, and there are smarter ways to do this so that it's a lot more automatic. We're just kind of getting it to work. So, okay, now we can plug in this curve and we get that. But we need to multiply it with our large scale features first. So, why don't we do that multiply with our large scale features? Yeah, that's driving max, so I want this output. Okay, we have some of what I was going for. Some of it. Not all of it just yet. Is that? I think that is nothing. Okay. Closer. Do we need to multiply add? It's always the mixing of these things is where it gets tricky, in my opinion. It just gets tricky. Okay. That feels dumb. No, I don't think this is the way we want to get this all mixed in together. Give ourselves a little bit more space here. How do we want to mix this? Okay, so we've got sine. I'm thinking maybe we really do just get another Gabor texture, but we won't do nearly as much as what we have going on here. What we'll do instead... What will we do instead? Let's get our position in so that we can have some vector math that drives this. And let's just take a look before setting the position at what our Gabor texture is doing. Okay, so I think what we can do is, first off, get rid of our orientation. Never mind, rotate our orientation to be this way. Then let's multiply this with sine, see what happens. 2. I guess it's hard to see exactly what's going on, / it's not really going to behave the way I'm expecting it to because these are going into the negative values. So what I'm going to do here is just add 1. And then we'll go 2 to 0. So we can divide it by 2, or, multiply by 0.5. And now we've got 0 to 1. Okay, good. Good. And can we have... Well, let's just play around with the scale. Let's play around with the scale and the frequency and the anisotropy. And see if we can get something interesting without building out a whole nother set of nodes. Okay. I think scale... I'm going to take another map range node. We're going to take Y, and we're going to scale it like this. Take another sine. What I want is high values, low values, high values, so that we get the framing that we were looking at last week. Okay. Okay, okay. That's opposite of what I wanted, but it's fine. We can always just invert it, right? Subtract 1. Or no, 1 minus that. So high, low, high. And we can get in another float curve, give ourselves some more control over it. So less extreme here, but I do want something like that. Yeah, okay. And now we'll take that and plug it in for the frequency. And no, the scale. That's what I want. Okay, we're getting closer. We're getting a lot closer. Problem is it drops all the way down to 0. And I guess it is. Do we not want to invert that? I don't think we do. I think I'm getting lost in the weeds now. Okay. This is perhaps more complicated than we actually need it to be. If we take y, well, I do want 0 to 1 gradient. But I want to make it so that this texture... I want to add in noise, is where I'm going here. Because if it's just smooth like that, well, then we'll just get a smooth output, right? We need a little bit more noise brought in. I was saying I don't want to overcomplicate this. We're going to overcomplicate this just a little bit. So, okay, we're going to add in some noise. Turn this down because we don't need that much. Let's unnormalize that. And now I am thinking we need to invert this. So let's, nope. Take 1, subtract out all of this noise. Cool. That's looking interesting. Oh, we had done it here, but that's fine. Let's take this, bring it in there. Okay. Can we plug in what we've just done with the x value here? Because we had a sine. Let's, multiply this just real quick with that. See how that looks. Yeah. Let's see if we can bring that back up from negative so that we can see all of the things, right? Which is, I guess, what we've done here. And this is why I was trying to keep my nodes organized. It's gotten so messy. This isn't good. Okay. There we go. So these nodes will bring this value back up from negative into our positive values. So this is what we want to multiply with the noise we just added. There we go. Okay. So that's interesting. But how does that affect our Gabor texture? It gets weird. It gets a little too weird. Let's turn down the scale on that again. And that's more what I wanted. Like, we've got some interesting layers and a lot less detail here. It's maybe still a little extreme, though, so... let's turn that... No, we don't want much roughness to this. A little bit would be good. But we do want to take this and turn it down, I think. Turn that frequency down? Yeah, because I want less of that. Okay. That's looking pretty good. I do want like something in the middle here. So can we just real quick, maybe. This is gonna break everything. No? Let's multiply this. Like, let's take it tau to negative tau. Nah, that's not really done what I was hoping it would. It's fine. Let's see how this mixes with everything else we've been doing, right? And get rid of these nodes we clearly don't need anymore from past experiments. I didn't want that to disconnect. My control is being odd today, but it's fine. Okay, so we've got all of that. Also, this is redundant. I was going to play around with the vector space, but that just didn't happen. So, okay. We don't need to multiply that there. What we do want to do is take this noise and multiply it with this noise. Oh, that feels wrong. That feels very wrong because this is going to be high and I want it to be low. We also want... Yeah, I got a little too lost in the weeds. This isn't going to exactly work. We need to keep massaging these values because this should be dark. We want it to be darker over here, lighter over here, so that we get high points over here, low points over there. I just wanted some waves so that we get a similar breakup of this line that between high and low values, a similar breakup in like direction as the texture that we've been working on all morning, this. So we want something that like has high points that curve this way and this way. So really, I guess we do want to take the orientation and plug it into our Gabor noise, I think. Oh boy. Let's see. I think we do that and maybe just forget all of the craziness that we were trying to do. Turn that scale back up. No. Can we... Hold on. Let's take that orientation, but I think we want it to be perpendicular because it is going in a similar direction here, but it just doesn't look like it should for whatever reason. And I also kind of want to see this. Okay, that's fine. Offset. So let's get a combine in here. I want to see this mesh offset by our largest Gabor noise. So let's get math, try and reorient it like I was just saying by adding pi over 2 because this is expecting radians now, and pi over 2 is 90 degrees, so this will be perpendicular to the noise that we have from everything else. Taking a look at our values here. Yeah, we just need to make this less extreme, I think. Like, we need bigger features. We need this to be much bigger, so our scale should be smaller, right? Yeah, okay. And this is just from our Gabor. We haven't done anything, to it as of yet. Like, we were doing a lot of craziness. That got overly complex. We just need some structures that go out along this way. but that's not really giving us as much as I thought it would. Like, these are all in the 0 to 1. I guess just because it's a bigger scale, yeah, we're getting fewer low values. Okay. If we turn up the frequency, we'll get more of those structures, but I want... Yeah, I think I was messing with scale before. I want scale to be fine, but we need more frequency towards the ends at the Y, which is what was happening here. So we're taking the Y value, mapping it to pi and whatnot to use with cosine. Yeah, so if we plug this in right now, high frequency here, low frequency here. I don't necessarily want that. I want this, which is the inverse. And then we added some noise. Okay, that's what we did a moment ago. I don't necessarily want to add in the noise, but I do want this control, and we want to multiply it with the x value because we need the x value to go from high to low over the whole thing. I know I keep saying this over and over, and I keep retooling this, but I'm just trying to get the large-scale structures to make sense before we try and fit it all together, because if this doesn't look good, everything else won't look good. And for some reason, I'm just having a harder time thinking through this. This is also a good place where we could bring in what we did last week and paint in some of the large-scale structures instead of trying to do it with noise and trig and all of these things. We could just paint in where we want the coastline to be. So why don't we do that? Let's do that. Let's do that, and I'll stop losing my mind over trying to figure out how these values are going to play with the noise texture and yada yada blada blada blada. So let's take 5 minutes, paint in some values. But before I do that, I think it's been a couple of hours. I need to take a quick break. I'll be back in like a minute or two. Then we'll do some painting, get that mixed in with the noise that we've just made, and then bring in some sand beds, which we made way at the beginning of the stream because that was super simple to do. But anyway, I'm going to take quick couple minutes, just get something to drink, take a breather, and then we'll do all of those things. Okay. And if I could just remember where the button is that switches between all of the different features here. Okay, I'll be right back in a hot minute. All right, I'm back. Yeah, I needed to stand up for a hot second. But anyway, let's get back to it. So, okay, like I was saying, I kind of want to do some quick texture painting. So let's do that. We kind of need to just turn off. Ooh, we can't do this. Ooh, hold on. I didn't set up this network for texture painting. So, what we need to do is get our group input node here and switch from a grid to actually using our input geometry. So we're gonna have to do a couple of changes. Let's see. Let's take this, drop it in. This only has 4 vertices, so not much is happening. Let's actually go into edit mode, select all. Hold on a hot second. I thought I turned this off. I did turn that off. Okay. Yep, select all. We're going to subdivide. Going to do it 10 times. We're gonna do it again. Subdivide another 10 times. I think that's still less dense than what we had because, okay, 500 by 500 is 250,000. No, how many zeros is that? 4, so 250,000 vertices. We just did 10 by 10, so we have 1,000 vertices here. So we could subdivide it. Ooh, how many times would we subdivide it to get a similar amount of geometry? Why don't we just subdivide it like 5 more times? 2 more times. This is getting dangerous. We also need to scale this up by 5. Ooh, and my computer might hate me. No? Did you just decide we weren't? Okay, for some reason it just said no, actually. Hold on a minute. We're not doing that action right now. 2.5, is that around the size? So we're 2 by 2. No, 4 by 4 right now. Yeah. Unless I'm... Okay, it had... I'm just trying to get it back up to the scale we had it. So this is 2 by 2 right now. So if I scale it by 5, it's going to go up to 10 in length. Is that the size we had? Let's hop out of there, plug this in, and see. No, that's bigger. But honestly, I think that's fine. That's fine. Turn that back off. Plug this back in. Because that's a very dense mesh. I think that's denser than what we had. Like, if we go into grid, okay. Now let's turn this on. Plug that in. No, I think it's about the same. It's just scaled up. Okay, so anyway, let's plug that in, turn that off, and do some texture painting. Woo! So, very simple. Let's just do texture paint. And we need, we're in vertex paint. We could either weight paint or texture paint. You know what? I'm going to go with weight paint because it takes a little less to set up and the control is nice in my opinion. Plus, I'm more familiar with it now after doing some last week. So, okay, let's start with our gradient from land to sea. And should we bring up a panel to be able to see how much that's going to offset everything? I think so. So we need to actually turn... Now let's make a new geometry node setup. And we're going to, if you weren't here last week, we're going to, now we don't need to subdivide that. We're going to make a little bit of a setup that makes it so that we can both paint and see our offset geometry at the same time, because it's bad to paint on transformed geometry. You'll see what I mean here in a hot second. So we need a new set of geometry nodes. This is going to come up above what we've been working on. And we're going to call this Gabor Beaches because, yeah. Anyway, this we're going to use set position, and we're going to create a new bit of geometry and just offset it. We're going to offset it in the X by something like 20. We'll see if that's enough here in a second. Yeah, okay. And we're going to take group. This is going to be our land layer. I don't know. We can name that something more descriptive here in a hot second. Anyway, we're going to use that as the Z value for the offset of this one. So let's plug in our Z. Real quick, just name that our height so that we know what we're doing, right? Name that height, and then go over to spreadsheet here and get that attribute to drive that parameter. So now, if we go into 3D view, because I forgot we had set the X offset here, but we don't have that in our combine. We don't see it here, but we do have two pieces of geometry, and one of them is offsetting on the Z. Critically, the one that's offset is over here to the side, which just means that we can move this panel over to the side and move into 3D view. And then move this panel so that we're looking only in the Z. And we can paint here. And as we paint, it will change in this view. Cool. Cool, great. Now we can see what we're doing as we're doing it. So, okay, let's increase this radius, maybe turn the weight down, because what I want to do is bring in some of these lower values here in the middle and maintain higher values. Oh, this is going to be interesting. It always is. We're just going to get some rough shapes. I want to fence in this area and then also make something a little bit more jagged in the middle. And we're just going to draw kind of whatever and do a lot of blurring it. Although the blur doesn't seem to do as strong of a blur as I want it to. So instead, we're going to turn the strength down and the radius down. Maybe strength up a little bit. And do some smearing. We can get some interesting things with this. Let's turn the strength up more so that we get more of this. We can get some interesting textures by just kind of smearing around some random noise. I've been enjoying using the smear tool more than the brush tool, but it just kind of depends on how you want to work and how your brain works a little bit too, right? How you view all of this information, like interpret it from looking at real world data and then figure out, okay, how do we apply those patterns? And also, how do I paint those patterns? Because painting it is very different from working with texture nodes, as we have seen. Anyway, this is starting to look interesting, but I do want this to be more of a gradient. So why don't we paint in some lower values, turn the strength way down, bring the radius up so that we can just kind of push all of this into our mesh. Just push it down. Just feel like Bob Ross for a hot second and paint some happy little blobs. Now let's turn that weight back up because I want to get a little bit more highlights. We're not going to spend forever on this. I'm just trying to get something that looks interesting and dynamic and hopefully won't end up looking like a hot mess at the end here. And if we need to adjust it to work with the noise that we've already made, we can. And that would be fun to try with this. Like, we could set up the same kind of switch of having one piece of geometry that doesn't have any offset here, and then the other actually applies the second set of geometry. We could do that here in a hot second. Let me just kind of blur a lot of this out because I added too much height. Turn that way down and the strength way down. Bring radius up. I just want to tone a lot of this down real quick. I know I said I wanted it, and now I don't want it. We're going off of vibes. And we could have brought up all of this more, but let's now get back to our geometry nodes and set up a similar thing in this set of geometry nodes. Okay, so let's turn that on and get in a join geometry. Bring this in. And then set the X to be the same value. And in fact, let's get a input. Group input, we're going to plug the X in there and then do the same here. So we already have height, but if we are going to have two sets of geometry nodes that are running with the same value, let's just copy this as new driver and paste this driver so that we know no matter what, our two pieces of geometry are going to have the same offset. Right? Well, ooh, no, we just duplicated that geometry. Ooh, that's... Yeah, we definitely just duplicated that because we've joined the geometry here. And then we brought it in. So this is working on both sets of geometry, and this is working on both sets of geometry. We don't want to join this again. Instead, what we're going to do is create an attribute. Store named attribute for this guy. Nope, not that one. Come on, undo. Thank you. For this guy, we're going to make it a Boolean, set it to true, and this is going to be the height geo. Yeah, height geo. I don't know. This is all very arbitrary, but if it works, it works. So now we have two pieces of geometry because we want to use this to be able to see our painting. And here we can separate our geometry. So we'll plug this in, get a named attribute, plug in height geo, and now we can see we have our height geo. This is what is being offset in the previous set of geometry nodes, and we have the paint geo. Okay. Cool, great. So the height geo is what's going to have all of this worked on, and then we're just going to join this again at the end so that we see it wherever the heck my group output is. There we go. Join geometry. We'll plug this in together. Let's duplicate that. Oh, is this not? Yeah, that's not in that panel. Perfect. Okay. We'll get that joined together, and now we can see both sets of geometry. One has all of the offsets, the other doesn't, and we're not double duplicating all of this. Perfect. Okay. just clean this up just a smidge. And now we should be good to introduce this height. Okay, so this is just straight up adding it because we've already offset the height in the first one. Let's also make that around 20 again. Anyway, we've already offset the height, so now it's being added in, which is basically what we wanted, right? But is that how we wanted to add it in? We have very little control over this combination of high and low values. So how do we add in more control? Also makes me realize I want to push all of this back a little bit. I know I was saying I want more detail here, which would be good. And we'll just do that a little bit by adding some of that in. You know, like just painting it real quick. Painting non-zero values, although it doesn't look like we're doing much of much. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Just paint in a little bit of extra noise because we can. And then anyway, what we're going to do is take this, turn it way down, turn the strength up just a touch, and we're going to push everything in across here. So we have more transition. We're not losing all of this detail, but we're pushing the transition back in towards the land. Okay. Maybe turn this up more, and the strength down again. Get more contrast by just bringing all of this up where we definitely want the land. And this is looking interesting. Still not fully what I want because there's a lot of noise going on here. And this is where we need to start smoothing a lot of things out, right? So how do we go ahead and do that? It would be ideal if we had a land and like sand texture. And I guess, yeah, we have sand. And I do want to add that in here. I'm just trying to think, okay, how... How do we like this noise? And how detailed do we want it to be? Because right now it's fairly detailed everywhere. Okay. Also, real quick, what we can do. So I was saying earlier, it bothered me that we don't have much control for the transition between the high and low values for our painted texture. And I was trying to think, okay, do we need to bring that into here to have more control as to how they mix? And I don't think we do. I think we can just adjust the overall height here with like float curves and whatnot, and then just let the height from this geometry node and that geometry nodes add as they are. Let's try not to overcomplicate it if at all possible. And if I am capable of doing that. Anyway, so we can take this. We know it's in the 0 to 1 range, so we can bring in a float curve and drop that on our Z. And now we can adjust the overall transition. So yeah, okay. We have our painted texture, but now we can really control the transition, because it can be hard to get detail but also have that transition that we want. With this, versus now just controlling the overall drop off of all the values. We have more control over that. And we get a lot of those little details where it sticks out a little bit more and a little less in various places that we were drawing. So like I can draw more of that in. And we'll just have more control over it, which is great. Bring up the strength. Let's paint in. Yeah, there we go. Now we're really starting to see the kind of things I wanted to see. Okay, so like let's do some offshoots here, break up this hard line. In a perfect world, it would match up with our noise texture better, but I don't think that's blending too terribly. Like, I think that looks pretty good. All things considered. Let's turn that down now and turn the strength down a little bit. Come in here and kind of accentuate that by painting in the opposite kind of spots. Okay, that is looking pretty neat. That looks pretty neat. I'm pretty happy with that. So, last couple of things, I suppose. First off, let's get out of weight paint. And, ooh. Okay, let's add one more control here. What I want to do is have a switch node. Probably a couple of switch nodes to be able to toggle on and off whether we have this set up for painting or not. So we'll drop this behind the join. So we'll set this to true so that when this is toggled on, we're in paint mode. So pull this over to our input, bring up our side panel, bring this above all of those values, and we want this to be paint mode. So yeah, now when we're in paint mode, we have two pieces of geometry. When we're not in paint mode, we want to actually take this geometry that does have the height offsets, but we also want to turn off the X offset. That's going to be important. So we need another switch node. Turn this into a float. We can use the same Boolean to control this, and we're basically going to say if this is true, use this X. If it's false, just don't offset in the X. Cool. Cool. So with all of that set up, right now we're in paint mode, turning off paint mode. Hold on. Oh, okay. One more quick thing, because these are supposed to work together, we need more. We need these to work. We need these to work together. So right now, it's just going to offset the X value regardless, which is why this didn't get fully reset. Oh. Wait a minute. Where are we using that X value? Because that was double offsetting, wasn't it? Paint mode, yeah, it's double offsetting. We don't need this at all. Now that we have this Boolean, we don't need to worry about this, I don't think. Yeah, because we're not going to have two pieces of geometry. We don't need to separate it. We don't need the attribute that defines which piece is what. We don't need any of the stuff we set up a moment ago. If I had thought about it, well, I would have sat here forever thinking through all of the various possibilities. So it's fine. Everything's fine. A little bit of work doing and then undoing, but sometimes that's just life, right? I'd rather just keep moving forward, even if that does mean we'll have to undo some of our progress every now and again. Anyway, this no longer has an X value, so we can just delete that. Now we have our paint mode and no paint mode. Cool. But we've gotten rid of the X, or the Z. Oh, okay. I guess I moved around to the combine XYZ that we were using for this noise. Let's just bring that in, and now we should be back to where we were. Okay, cool. Perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. So this is what we have after all of that work. And we don't need that panel anymore. What I want to do is bring in this sand bed texture that we made earlier. So if you weren't here, we have this texture that looks just kind of like a bunch of ripples in the sand. But of course, it looks kind of weird now with this whole height offset business. So what we need to do is figure out a way to mix between this texture and all of this. So why don't we just bring in a mix node, because that's first thing that comes to mind at the moment. Switch this over to vector. Then let's take this vector and that vector, and then we need some factor to determine where one is present and the other is not. So, okay, let's take this, plug this into the offset that ultimately we're going to use. And I guess what we want to take is our Z value, so we can separate XYZ of our position. Oh, that reminds me. No, we multiplied out the Z, so all of this stuff that uses position doesn't have the Z, so having that painted in doesn't change our noise textures at all. We're good there. But okay, we've got XYZ. We're going to use the Z, and we need some logic as to where the cutoff is for the Z. So we're going to use a smooth minimum, I want to say. Let's just take a look at this and get minimum in here. So minimum of 0.5. What that's going to do, I always get minimum and maximum flipped around in my head. What this is going to do is make sure that any value above this is cut off and set to this. Okay, so this is bringing in a ceiling. What we want to do is bring in a floor. I guess it doesn't really matter which way we go, so long as we're consistent. Anyway, we've got a smooth minimum. And let's look at our mix. So where it's 0, it's going to take A, and where it's 1, it's going to take B. So smooth minimum. I mean, let's just see how it goes, I guess. So get rid of that. Huh, that's not driving it quite the way I thought it would. Switch it to smooth maximum. Okay. Okay. And now we can turn this value down, right? I don't think that's the way that we want to mix between these two. No. No, 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 no. No, instead, I think we're going to just set this position using all of this stuff that we've done, and then add in another set position later on down the line, which will be a mix based on blurring this attribute, maybe? That worked well last week. Let's see if we can get that to work here. Vector, we're going to take this, smooth it out. We don't want to visualize it like that. We're going to take the... No, we're going to plug that in here so it's easier to see for the moment. We're going to smooth this out so that we maintain a lot of those large scale structures that we spent so much time making, right? Actually, to that end, hold on. Let's get another combine. And let's just look at the large scale and plug that in and instead. Okay, that's not what I wanted. Hold on. Now let's take this. That's very not what I wanted. I guess the small scale details were bringing in a lot more than I thought they were. If we add them together, well, yeah, that's just what we were going for. Let's just take a look at the small scale. Okay, this is... Seeing all of the offset is messing with me a little bit too. Let's get rid of that for the moment. Really? Okay, we get that multiply. Yeah, that's not what I want. Okay. We'll go back to what we were doing a moment ago and taking this combined noise, because I like this. It needs some refining, but let's just keep going for a moment. Let's put the offset in that so we can see all of these blurred iterations. No, not the offset into that. Let's mute that. There we go. Okay. I just want to see what we're blurring. Okay, so we've got our large scale features in here. Now we need to take the minimum of this height. And if we're going to do that, it'd be easier to just work with the Z. So let's switch this back to float, actually. And use this for the offset that we're looking at right now. Should be same thing. Yeah. Just making sure. Sometimes you think it'll be the same thing, and then it turns out it's not. But we can take this and take a look at that. If we do the minimum right now, this is much closer to 0, so it wouldn't pop up so much. So why don't we do another set position just to add some Z height, bring it up to 0.5 for a moment. And then let's mix this Z value with that blurred Z value and set that into the combine XYZ, see what happens here. And we need to take the minimum of the two, I want to say. Or minimum, maximum, potato put, I don't know. Like I keep saying, it's hard to figure out which one's which sometimes, but yeah, we're going to get rid of smooth minimum for a moment because I need to think through what's what. Plug that in for the factor. Okay, maximum. Maximum, we get all of those ripples in, which is good. So we maybe just need to... Oh, that was where we did that. Let's just add some height by going like this. So, okay. The high points now have a little bit of rippling going on. So I think we really did want minimum of the two. And let's turn down how much we're adding in here. No? Blending all of this together can really be the difficult part, I have found. So let's save this and, in fact, open up last week's stream project. Oh, what was that date? The 28th? Okay. Let's open that real quick because I did a good job of mixing there. Oh, and this was all of my testing after the stream because I was trying to figure out what the heck was going on. Or is it? No. This is what we ended up doing in stream. Okay. So here we have a lot of nonsense going on. Wow, that's not what I thought that looked like. Anyway, the important part here is the maximum is how we ended up mixing. That's right. Okay, we multiplied two noises together, took the maximum of the two to use to mix between the multiplication and the... No, we didn't use the maximum to mix at all. We just took the maximum as one of the inputs. Okay, that makes way more sense. And then we use a different value as the factor. That's how we get this to mix well. Okay. Let's go back to... Yeah, don't save that. Here, where I'm trying to do this all kinds of backwards. Okay, so we've got the minimum of both of these, and we want to multiply between, not the... or mix between the larger scale stuff, right? So take the maximum of that. Yes. I think that's working. We just need to add some value to our sand. Bring that up. There we go. Okay. And right now our factor is just set to 0.5, so we can move this around as much or as little as we want to. But that is looking better. Okay. And what if we get rid of our blurring? We get all of that noise back in there. Cool. Okay, I think this is the method that we want to mix with, but oh boy, that's getting real messy and problematic. So let's turn this back on so that we get all of this in here, right? Only problem is that if we're mixing with this value, none of the initial height gets brought in. So what we need to do is we need to add in that height value. But if we add it in and then use it to also set the offset, we'll get double this height value. Which could be fine. We just need to remember to divide by 2. Theoretically. Oh, and that is also just our large scale everything. No, no, it's not. It's the end result. Yeah, that's the end result. We're just taking the blurred version, running into the maximum, and then using this to set the position again, but we're not setting it here. Okay, we needed to bring that in. I don't think we want to set this position again. I think what we want to do is use this combination to set this position. Oh, we're so close. It just needs to mix together. That's like the last thing we need to do here. Well, I say last. There are other things that we need to do, but like to get what I had planned for today and the goal for today done, just got to get these values to mix. So, how do we go about doing that? Also, I keep hitting the button that, like, should just, yeah, get rid of those nodes, but it keeps deleting it and breaking the connection. It's just a keyboard issue. Gah. Anyway. Let's move these nodes so that it's a little easier to keep track of what's actually going on. We can get rid of that smooth, shade smooth. And I suppose since we're just taking this value from this Gabor texture, we could grab these and move them way over here by themselves, unparent that so it's not a mess, and move all of this out of the way, break those connections because we don't need them anymore. Cool. That'll help get rid of some of the mess here. Okay, and this is where we're reading. This is where we're reading the value from our texture paint. But we don't need that anymore because we're not mixing like that. Okay. Okay. So this is no longer in rock layers. So we need to get rid of all of that. Except for you and you are actually part of that node group. The rest of you need to come out here so we can make sure we know what it is we're messing with. Okay, so we've got this set position. Don't need that viewer node. We've got this, which is the addition of the two different layers that we have. This is just mapping the range for some of our detail, something I might want to rethink later. This is actually combining our height into a vector so that we can actually set the position. And we're setting shade smooth. So what I want to do is say, okay, if you're below some value, we need to actually have you be sand. This is sand. Just label that, make sure we keep track of that. We'll call it sand. It's basically what we did earlier, but now it's a little cleaner and easier to work with. Okay. So we had that plugged into here so that we could bring the sand up. Only thing is, we're mixing this. Weird. We're taking the maximum between these two values, which means, get rid of that viewer because, yeah, the sand is always going to be pretty low. We just need to make sure that the sand is actually above where this is at. So let's use this as the Z for a moment. Yeah, that's well above. Oh, it's taking the maximum. We should take the minimum between the two. No, that still didn't take it. Okay. What the heck? What the heck are you even doing? Hold on, so that we can actually see the values. I want to bring this in, set its position real quick. I just want to look at the original geometry, but in order to do that, like the original flat geometry, in order to do that, we have to take the position and do vector math. Multiply this, just negate the Z component, and now we can set the position of that and take a look at it. We have a flat plane. Great. Test geo. Now we can take a look at it and look at the values that we have mixed here. So as we increase, it didn't want to do that in real time for me. Okay, we will be typing in values because we have too much geometry. As we're playing with the mix, that's not actually doing anything. So why is that? We've got our sandy texture. There's barely anything going on because these values have been crushed pretty significantly. And then we brought them pretty far up. And then we have these values, which are the blurred values from what we've been making all day. We want to take the minimum of the two, the maximum of the two. It's so difficult to tell. Yeah, the maximum gets rid, it brings in a floor. The minimum brings in a ceiling. Okay. So this is correct. I think we want the maximum. It's just we've brought the sand value up way too high. There we go. Okay, 0.05. Yeah. Okay. So now we know where it should be rocky and where it should be sandy based on that maximum. Then if we mix these together, I mean, they're already mixed, right? I don't think we need that. No, we do need that. We very much need this because we need the original height value. Separate XYZ. There we go. We need the original height value, which should be in 0 to 1 still. We'll use that as our factor so that we can set a value to actually do this transition, make sure that it's only in the marine environment versus on land where we want it to have all rocks for now. So if we actually use this to offset our geometry, we see this, which doesn't seem to bring in our sand for the time being, but we have this Z value, and we need that to have another float curve. We're using a lot of float curves today, and we're going to take a look at how this float curve is being interpreted. Okay, so we have minimum. So where it's black, we're going to have A. So we actually want to flip these around. And then that'll read better. Yeah, okay. Okay. And now we just get to play around with where is that cutoff, right? Actually, because there will be a cutoff, we can say at like 0.5, that's above the water. Yeah, we'll say 0.5. Ooh. Now we can start bringing in some islands now that we understand a little better of where those would be. Now we're going to push the water level up a little bit more and bring this down. Let's... No, I want that to be smoother. There we go. Okay. This should mix in our sand very nicely. At least, geez, I hope it does. I might want to crush those values even more, though, because I want hard line between the rocks and the sand. Not a hard line, but like there should be more to it. So I guess let's not say that's the water line. This is just, okay, where do we want it to be sand versus rocks? And I want a decent bit of this to be rock. So, yeah, let's just really crush those values. Okay, I think that's better. That's better. We might bring in another float curve so that we can control as it goes out from the land. We get more of a drop off of rocks, but maybe this isn't the right scale to be doing that with. The important part is we can get rid of viewing this and see that we're still not mixing. Where is the mix? Oh. Let's mute that. Okay, we are mixing, but we are only mixing... Okay, yeah, there's something I want to do with blur attribute, but I guess that wasn't quite it. But now it all looks very similar. So let's give this 0 degrees of rotation. That looks better, right? Now it's a lot easier to tell where the heck that sand is. This is all still very rough. Very, very rough texture, but it's getting closer and closer to what I want. Not quite. We're still not quite there, but a lot closer than we were last week. And we've learned a lot about how the Gabor texture works, so I'm pretty happy about that. Yeah, like this is sticking out, so I would want the lines to stick out with it to match our reference. At the very least, we have sand down here, we have rock up here, we have rock outcrops all around. That noise is pretty intense. I could fine-tune this forever for the record, but that's not really worth it right now. I'll have to make this prettier because there's a lot going on here that I think is way too noisy. And again, it doesn't quite match what I was hoping for. Maybe painting in some of that detail was not really the way to go about it. I should have let more of the larger scale structures drive where the coast is, I think. Yeah, and we should have blended between high and low values, but that is basically what I wanted to do today. I did mention earlier I was thinking about showing off how we could do this with volumes. This isn't exactly at a point where I would want to do that, but we could do that just real quick, maybe with another Gabro texture, because I do want to show off kind of how we would take this and then add in XY detail, right? Where we can have detail come in under an overhang. So let's see if we can just do that real quick, because it's not a hard workflow and we've done all of the work with the noise. We're not going to make anything quite as detailed. It's just literally going to be a couple of shapes, but I want to show how we can use these noise textures to get 3D structures, not just offsetting the height. So let's get a volume. Come on. Volume cube. We're going to take a look at that real quick. So we have this cube, and what we have here that's really important to keep in mind is the density factor. So we're going to use some noise to drive density. Let's get in another Gabor texture, and we'll switch this to, I don't even think we need to switch it to 3D to get 3D structure. I realized we didn't actually explore 3D because it's interesting. We have this ball to rotate around for the angle of all of our noise, as opposed to in 2D where it's just a 1D, just what's the 2D angle, right? Anyway, we have our Gabor texture. We're going to plug this into density. It got smaller. What we need to do to really see this now, well, before we start making geometry, let's bring in a compare node. That's not what I wanted, but it would have worked. But let's do this the proper way. Let's bring in a math node, do a comparison, and just do a simple greater than. And you can already see something's happening here. 0.5 is fine. Let's bring the scale of this down, and there we go. Okay. So never mind, we do need to make it 3D. I was thinking maybe if we put in 3D coordinates, because that's what we have here with our voxels, it would give us some 3D noise, but I guess it's just not going to do that. We do have to do 3D, and now we have some 3D noise. Beautiful. We can, of course, then take our position, vector math, do multiply, start off with all ones, and we can crush down our vector space or stretch it and get more interesting results. This is still not really showing off how we make this into a mesh, right? What we need to do is, it's a volume node, volume 2 mesh. And that gives us a grid. It looks bad, but we can adjust the adaptivity and you'll get less blocky results. You can also adjust the grid. You can say by amount, by size, by grid. Like, all of those have different ways it's going to interpret the density of your volume cube. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty of how all of those different algorithms work today, but this is how you would go about doing the same sort of thing, but now with 3D textures, and you would get a 3D mesh. You would get all of that noise, including overhangs and reliefs and all of that. So this would be the better way to do a lot of these landscape things, but conceptually it's easier to work in 2D for a little while to really understand how all of this works. And then I want to see if we can just simply convert it over to 3D. The big caveat with that will be switching from combining XYZ and using a set position to just using these float values and then plugging them into a volume cube and converting that volume to a mesh. So yeah, very fun, very cute, cool. I want to try and get some more interesting things on the Z for a second. Yeah, that's very neat. I also have ideas for taking this density and like right now we just have a greater than, right? We're just converting this all into 1 and 0. You can, of course, play around with the different aspects of a float, of a range of values. You can maybe play around with labeling, like storing attributes on your volume cube with density. I hope that makes sense. Like, you can make basically different kinds of rock based on this Gabor texture and then do an erosion sim and have those different kinds of rocks, the two different types of density that you have those be have different hardnesses so that they erode in different ways as water or wind goes across them. That's something that I want to do in the future, but for now, that's really going to be it. Next week, I think I want to do something a little different, but I do plan on returning to this because this is not done. This is still not the beach that I want to build in Blender. It's getting a lot closer, and a lot of the theory is there. Now it needs refining. So anyway, that's really going to be all, everyone. Thank you all so much for watching. And hold on, let me switch back to Facecam. All right, we have been building beaches in Blender. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I guess until next week, have a good one, and I will see you then. Bye.